My wife and my friend Mike and I got to check out the Hyundai Ioniq 5 recently, which I had read a little bit about online, but for the most part, I didn't actually know very much going into this impressions video. I only got about 20 to 30 minutes with this, so I'm not considering it a review, but I must say, I think this is by far the best Hyundai I've ever checked out, especially in terms of value. That's the word that this car screams as we checked it out, because of course, it's not super luxurious. You notice that as soon as you get in. I mean, it's got some front heated seats, but they're all made of fabric. You know, there's no fake leather or leather of any kind. No ventilated seats, and in fact, the second row is controlled a lot by traditional levers and handles. And the particular model we were checking out did not have a glass roof. So you don't get like this expensive, extremely fancy feeling when you're inside the car. It's kind of like the same type of interior you would find in a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla, but the exterior certainly stands out a lot more than those traditional vehicles do. Hyundai went with a style with the Ioniq 5 that it's iconic in its own regard. Maybe that's why they chose the term Ioniq, but certainly very modular, and they like to have all these different squares and cubes throughout the entire vehicle. The headlights have them. They even have some imprinted on the interior seating, and some people might be into this design. For me, it feels a little bit like they didn't go hard enough in this direction. I don't mind weird designs, but certain angles of the vehicle definitely feel like traditional and kind of standard for a crossover, while other angles are like, wow, this is really trying to be futuristic. And the fact that it doesn't have a light bar, even though it kind of looks like it should, was actually a bit refreshing. You know, it's recognizable, and we did drive by a couple in the area. So I think if the goal of the Ioniq 5 was to be iconic, then it certainly achieves that. But having seen pictures of it online and then seeing it in person, I can confidently say it's much, much bigger than it looks. I think the overall ratios of the height and the slope on the back of the vehicle make it seem like it's a compact, but once you check it out in person, it's actually quite a decent size. You could fold down the second row pretty easily and have yourself a really solid car camping setup. I could easily fit back there if I needed to, but the reason I want to come back to that point of value is because we got to check this thing out at a dealer, and it starts at $45,000, and that includes the dealer markup. And yes, there are more expensive, more luxurious versions of this car that have a glass roof and more heated seat options. The fact that this model we checked out was actually the same price as the cheapest Model 3 and yet goes over 300 miles estimated by the EPA does kind of say something, you know, because I'm used to people saying like, oh, no one can beat Tesla's price for range, and now we're actually starting to see some pretty great value vehicles like this where they're not as expensive as a 300-mile range Tesla and they still go 300 miles. Of course, you're still going to have to rely on the Electrify America network, so you might lose some of your cost savings to that, but still, I find it impressive that Hyundai was able to make a vehicle go that far and still have this price point. And as far as the interior goes, it certainly is catering to a more traditional car buyer, as you'd expect, because the steering wheel has lots and lots of buttons on it, and while they do have some screens, they did wrap them in these white bezels that kind of confuse me. I'm not really a fan of that design choice. Maybe it looks better if you go with the white interior, and the model we checked out just happened to have a black interior, so white bezels felt a little bit weird. But right beneath that screen you have traditional physical buttons that do a bunch of different things, and then below that you have non-physical buttons that, you know, can't move around, but they are buttons that you can reach to once and then just kind of memorize where they are, and you don't have to worry about them changing around, which would certainly be more helpful to probably generations of people that are used to having more knobs and dials in their car. The steering wheel, I think, just had a tad too much going on for me, but something that a traditional car buyer would probably be more comfortable with. You've got two stalks behind the wheel with your windshield wiper options and your blinkers. On top of that, you have a gear selector also behind the wheel, and then a front-facing knob that lets you choose your drive mode. So there's a sport mode if you want to accelerate quite a bit, there's an eco mode to prioritize range, and then normal, which I guess gives you a good balance of both. So you have lots and lots of options to choose from, and I'm just more of a minimal guy, so it's not exactly meant for me, but all of the buttons and knobs, at least according to Mike, who was driving the car, were pretty ergonomically placed. We were also pleasantly surprised by the screen. You know, we didn't get too much chance to mess around with the software. It's obviously not going to have as many bells and whistles as a Tesla, but I was surprised by the refresh rate. It felt like it was over 30 hertz and the screen responded very quickly. It was not laggy at all, and it brought up everything we needed in a time-effective manner. I would have liked it if the screen layout was a little bit better though, because the screen behind the steering wheel is actually a bit bigger than the hole that you have to look through to see that screen. So even when I sat in the driver's seat, I was having a hard time seeing all of the information the screen was displaying, and even if you adjusted the position of the steering wheel, you kind of have a hard time finding all that data. So the screen to the right is more appropriately placed, although I just would have preferred it if it was a tad bigger. But either way, these little details with the screen and interior I don't think are going to matter that much to someone in the market for Ioniq 5, because what you're getting for here is kind of a no-nonsense vehicle that just prioritizes giving you a decent amount of storage space, because again, you've got this hatch on the back and lots of room to lay down or load stuff up in without breaking the bank. It's actually really hard to find any EV that can break the 300-mile mark and cost under $50,000. And even with the dealer markup, that's what the Ioniq was able to achieve. And I think for many out there, the compromises will absolutely be worth it. One other compromise you should probably be aware of is it does have a frunk, but it's insanely small. You could probably fit like a laptop in there and not much else. I don't even think a large pizza box would fit in the frunk, but it does have one. And then of course the interior just not being quite as luxurious. Even in the second row, I wasn't able to spot ventilation for the air conditioning, which is something my 2007 Hyundai Sonata is even lacking. So the fact that this is, you know, brand new and it's still kind of missing some basic features like that surely might annoy some people that are expecting to get a more luxurious experience when spending $45,000 on their car. I'm also not entirely sure how Hyundai does with the aging of the battery and the management system, so it's very possible that within a year or two of owning this car, it's not quite going to hit the 300-mile mark. But since it's not a Tesla, it's probably going to be a bit more consistent with its EPA estimates, and hopefully quality control won't be as major of an issue with these models. But overall, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that there are EVs getting this affordable and getting range this good. And if that's what you're prioritizing and you're not looking for like a smartphone on wheels and you want something that's going to feel very familiar and comfortable with a traditional vehicle, then this I think might be a fantastic option for a ton of people. And if I was not such a Tesla fanboy, I would absolutely consider getting one of these things just for the value proposition and how much money you'll save by not having to pay for gas, oil changes, or as many brake pad replacements, considering this does have adaptive regenerative braking. In fact, they even put pedals on the steering wheel just for you to adjust the regen sensitivity, which I wish they would just have on at full blast all the time. But it's definitely not as noticeable as most dual motor Teslas are, because this is a rear-wheel drive option, so they're not quite as efficient as Tesla yet. It still takes a 78 kilowatt-hour battery pack in rear-wheel drive to get the Ioniq 5 over 300 miles per charge. But as Mike floored it quite a few times as we were driving it around, I was still really impressed with how fast it could go. Considering it only had one motor, it was still willing to accelerate much faster than I was comfortable going, and it had an incredibly smooth ride with great suspension and great handling, and I was happy to see there were several Ioniq 5s at the dealer for people to choose from. So I hope they find homes soon, and if you guys have checked out the Ioniq 5 recently, feel free to let me know your thoughts on it down below. Thank you to everyone supporting the channel over on Patreon, and of course just watching these videos, because that does make a big difference too. Take care and have a great day.